Oh, hello, Anthony. How you doing?
That worked. Okay, good. I don't know what happened. I've had some trouble with Skype occasionally, but
Well, we are in a Mercury retrograde. How fitting I
yeah,
point that out because you're an astrologer, and that's going to be
yeah.
the main theme of this program, I'm sure. I have your 3 websites that can be accessed from your Facebook page up, the 2 Wix sites, as well as the Cosmic Tuesdays blog on WordPress. But first of all, how's your last name actually pronounced?
Pico, like the tea, orange Pico tea.
Okay. And it was Daniel Teague. Kudos to that man again. It seems like so many, like every other guest I've had has been
He's
recommended
everywhere.
by him. Yes. And, well, he operates at the spiritual level. Not so shocking. Let me quickly get up on Daniel Teague's message board here on Facebook, the specific message where he recommended you. Here he is. Maybe I can use a couple things he pointed out there as a guide throughout this program. But to start off, first of all, happy spring equinox. I did postpone this show by about 15 minutes because the equinox time was actually at 5:58 Eastern,
Right.
just about 15 minutes ago, and I really wanted to get a couple mantras in during that to enhance my my spiritual awakening. Of course, the Illuminati bloodlines, they always do their rituals at astrologically and numerologically significant times and places. Well, we better fight fire with fire, I say, by doing the same thing with our benevolent, love-based rituals at the same time. So, and of course, we got the full moon tonight, and we'll definitely talk about this in the show, by the way. Let me just quickly check the calendar here. The full moon is at 9:44 p.m. Eastern. And one thing I'm really puzzled about, I just want to get this out of the way now. I don't understand why Easter is not this upcoming Sunday. The Easter is supposed to be the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. This full moon is technically after the official start time of the equinox if you go by exact time. So I'm kind of stumped as to why it's on April 21st and not this upcoming Sunday. Maybe if you know anything about that, you can get into that. But anyhow, I've babbled long enough. Anthony Picco, you are a radio host and an astrologer. You've got the floor. Take this opportunity to plug your show. Tell us your websites and also your life story, specifically how you discovered that astrology is not a fraud and why it deserves to be taken seriously. Debunk the debunkers to conclude, please. You got the floor.
Okay, debunk the debunkers. That's fun. I actually stopped trying to fight with them years ago. I did, back in the early days of chat rooms, I would get on there and try to argue with the skeptics. And they just, at one point, they're like, well, if you do 12 charts and 12 strangers, it's like, I'm not going to do 12 astrology readings to make you happy. So I've stopped trying to prove it because they don't really want to believe. So it's like arguing with politically with somebody that isn't on your side, and they're just going to make up excuses as to why not. What I do know is that, what got me into astrology was my girlfriend at the time had her chart read, and I thought astrology was full of crap. I had been into mystical stuff. I'd taken Silva Mind Control. I was studying Alan Watts and all that stuff. And I just thought astrology didn't make any sense. And she came back and she said, well, it was kind of interesting. You should check it out. And I figured, all right, I'll check it out. And I'm a Capricorn, and we're prone to paranoia. And by the time she was done, I want to know how long this astrologer had been tapping my phone, which one of my friends she'd spoken to, how long she'd been following me to find out something that was just so accurate. It completely freaked me out. And what happened was I decided, well, I got to figure out how she did this. I'm looking at a piece of paper with squiggles on it, and I'm thinking, you got all that from this. And I became obsessed. That's in my chart too. I'm a bit obsessive at times. And within 3 years, I'm giving professional astrology readings. I'm not even quite sure how that happened. But there I was, suddenly a professional astrologer after 3 years earlier, just thinking it was a bag of nonsense. And what I found, the only thing I can say now when people say, well, can you prove astrology? It's like, well, no, I can't scientifically prove something. But of course, just because science can't prove it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Science makes up their own parameters. So how do you argue with them when it won't fit their own measuring stick that they made up? But I do know I've got 33 years of satisfied clients. I've done hundreds and hundreds of charts. I've always had a standard, no questions asked, money back promise. It's like, you don't think the reading is right. You don't feel comfortable with it. You don't have to pay me. You don't even have to explain why. Nobody has ever taken me up on it. The only woman who didn't pay because she was very unhappy about it actually was kind of funny. She thought she was 6 a.m. and she was 6 p.m. So she actually called me a few months later and had the chart done properly, because the time was so completely off that I kind of had her inside out instead of the way she was. So of course the reading wasn't completely accurate. So to me, that's the proof. And when people turn and say, oh, well, the planets couldn't have any gravitational effect on you, the stars don't have any effect on you. And the truth is, I don't know any astrologers that say the planets have any effect on you. We don't know how astrology works, and we'll be the first to admit it. I don't know why. I do know, as a pretty standard example I give, if somebody's moon is squaring or 90 degrees from their Mars, moon is emotions, Mars is how we take action, how we're aggressive, how we're assertive, they're going to have a temper. A square is kind of a difficult connection in a chart. So what happens is their first response to things is anger. They're very emotionally defensive. I have seen it time and time again. I don't think I've ever seen somebody that didn't have that sort of a response. As a matter of fact, Moon Square Mars people will actually sometimes start defending themselves before they even get attacked, because it's just sort of this chip they have in their shoulder. Now, when I look at an analog clock and I see like the big hand is on the 12 and the little hand is on the 4, it's telling me it's 4 o'clock. Now, I don't sit here thinking the clock is causing time to exist. Time exists regardless how we take account of it. So I don't know why, but if I see Mars square the moon in somebody's chart, they're going to have problems with their anger. And I know it's proven true over and over again. Why that happens, I don't quite know. We have some theories. I have to say that if you take it a step out spiritually, I mean, the universe is all one and we're all connected, even though each one of us is an important individual. So it would make sense in some way that the conditions of the world, the moment you were born, the moment the universe gave birth to you, everything that was going on in the universe at that moment is going to affect you, because you're a child of that exact moment. And so on some level, maybe spiritual more than scientific, it works in that way. A friend of mine and I, we were studying astrology together. We realized that, you could probably take the newspapers from around the world the day after you were born, because there's like a 24-hour, news cycle. This is back before the internet. And you could probably do someone's chart from that. Because if we're a child of the universe the moments we're born, well, if there's a war breaking out in, some foreign country, that's kind of the energy that's going to be in your chart. Because you were born when that was happening. As a matter of fact, one of the things, the 1960s are known as somewhat of a disruptive decade politically and socially. Men started having long hair. People didn't feel they had to get married. All the rules were up in the air and thrown around. Well, what happened during the 60s was that Uranus, the planet of disruption and sudden change and wild new ideas, was conjunct or merged with Pluto for a while in the sky. Pluto is the planet of transformation, evolution. They were both in Virgo, which can be about rules and the proper way to do things and the tradition. So Uranus explodes all the rules. Pluto makes this transformation. Suddenly, all of the old rules don't matter anymore, and that's what was going on at that point in time. And Pluto, Uranus only maybe every 150 years or so, I don't know the exact number, actually meet up. So this isn't a common occurrence, but that's what created the 60s. Now you have to realize everybody born at that time has this in their chart. So never mind the fact that society was being affected by these planets by transit. These are now in the planets of all the children born from about 1963 to about 1967, 68. So there's a whole generation, a micro generation, that's going to have these issues inside them. And this is the generation that grew up to become the computer people. And Virgo can be about details and fussing. And so now you have a whole new way of the processing of information in a system that uses zeros and ones and is built up from there. So you're talking about something really stripped down that, nitpick by nitpick, 0 by 0 by 1 by 1. They built this entire system up as a new way of processing information. So the children of the 60s, who were born in the 60s, took it in that direction, but societally it kind of exploded all over the place because suddenly all the old rules didn't matter anymore. We didn't have new rules yet, which I think is part of the reason the 60s kind of fizzled out at some point, because we broke all the rules and then it was like, well, now what? What do we do now? And we didn't quite know. And so we tended to retreat a little bit from it. So that's my take in terms of how I notice and believe in astrology. And I've noticed it too in terms of, I'm not a mundane astrologer, which is like a world events astrologer, but I am aware of the stuff. And I know that you can take the outer planets, which move very, very slowly, and pin them to generations. The hippies, my generation, I'm a baby boomer, we all had Pluto in Leo. And although all of us were different on some level, Pluto in Leo is asking us to transform ego and to make ego more important. And suddenly we have a whole generation that became the me generation, the me decade. Do whatever you want to do as long as you don't hurt anybody. Just be yourself, which is about as Leo as you can get. Well, the sign that comes before Leo is Pluto in Cancer. And the generation before that, they come home from World War II. What do they want to do? They want to make nuclear families everywhere. Everybody wants to own their own home. They want to settle down to a nice, cozy home and a sane, safe environment, which is certainly as Cancerian as we come. So up until that particular period, people would often live with their parents for years. It was not unusual, I got to count the numbers right, 80, 90, 100 years ago, where your parents had a big house if you had reasonable middle-class background, and therefore, you and your bride maybe lived in the upstairs back room, and then somebody else lived in the basement, and you didn't always have your own home immediately. The family was much larger than that Cancerian concept of one home, one nuclear family. So you can see, and you can believe we can go back and through history. There's a great book called Cosmos and Psyche. God, it's like a zillion pages. It came out a few years ago, where an astrologer actually goes through history and pins all these planetary things to the things that were happening around the world and changing. So it's a clear effect in the world, much less on a personal level, which I'll get into in a moment. But I do find it kind of fascinating. And in the big picture, in the 60s, we had Aquarius, the musical, and this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Well, ages in astrology last about a little over 2,000 years. So we were coming out of the age of Pisces, which started around the year 0, which is around the time the Christ consciousness became important. I'm not going to argue whether Christ really existed or whatever, yada, yada. But there was a shift in consciousness that we merged into a Piscean kind of like we're all one. Artists stopped signing their own works. They were just to the glory of God. The symbol of Christianity ended up being the fish. And Pisces is 2 fishes. And the symbol is very much about the ocean. So what happens is sometime in the past couple of centuries, things shifted. Astrologers will argue like crazy as to exactly when the age of Aquarius started. But the age of Aquarius is a sign that is acutely aware of the entire world, but aware of it in the sense of how do you serve the world? The symbol of Aquarius is the water bearer. It's not the water itself. It's the guy or the woman who goes down to the river and gets the water and brings it back to the village, because these signs were invented before indoor plumbing. So that was their job. They served the tribe or the village by going down and getting the water and bringing it back and hauling it to the village. So the symbol of Aquarius is often the people. It's taken on a futuristic quality of scientists and researchers. Who are these people who are doing things to improve our life on the world? So I think what we have with the beginning of the age of Aquarius, and I kind of pin it to the start of the industrial age, roughly. So I think we're kind of, it's not even the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It's kind of mid-morning in Aquarius right now, as far as I'm concerned. And we're now coming to a point where everybody's individual abilities are as important as being connected to the universe. Yes, we are all one, but yes, every one of us comes into the universe with a unique set of skills and talents, and we can contribute to the world in our own unique way on whatever level we contribute, whether it's just in our immediate neighborhood, whether we become world-renowned scientists, whether we become world-renowned political leaders, or whatever it might be. We all are there to contribute. And that's something that I think personal astrology really brings out. Everybody's chart is different. Yeah, there are similar charts, but there are charts. An exact chart, the one that you were born with, is not going to repeat for thousands of years because all the planets move at different speed. So the moon, which we call a planet, we know the moon and the sun aren't planets, but we call them that for shorthand. The moon goes to the zodiac every 28 days. The sun once a year, Venus, Mercury, Mars about every year or two roughly, Jupiter every 12 years, Saturn every 29 years, Uranus every 85 years, Neptune I think is 178 years maybe a little less, and Pluto's every 250 years. Well, by the time they all line up again, they're all moving at different speeds. Millennia have passed. So everybody's chart is completely unique. Not that many people are born at the same time in the same hospital. It's something we've all kind of looked up because we call them time twins in astrology. If you're born in the same within 50 miles and 30 minutes on the same day, date, and year, you're considered time twins because your charts are very, very, very similar. And there's not a lot of them, but they do exist. So all of us are particularly unique, and we have something to offer the world. As a matter of fact, it was funny. A few years ago, I was working with my assistant. I'm also an art director, and I was kind of in a depressed funk or whatever. And he said, what about this? What about that? And I said, I'll get it right in my next life, when I reincarnate. And he turned to me and he said, but this is the only time you're going to be Anthony Picco. And it just kind of struck me. It's like, right, this is the only time my very unique way of being this person is going to exist here on the physical world. I mean, I believe in reincarnation. I believe we existed before we incarnated here. But this moment here, these 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years I'm going to have is a very unique place to be in, and I have unique things to offer the world, and so does everybody else. And Andrew, if you have any questions along the way, don't hesitate to interrupt and say, hey, wait a minute, what about, or anything like that. Okay? You're there, right?
Yeah,
okay, just making sure. I once did a show where I was off the air and didn't know for 30 minutes. So I wanted to make sure. So the thing about the uniqueness of everybody, when I look at a chart, usually when a person comes to me, they have a problem. Most people don't come to astrologers because they're happy, which is okay. I'm there to help them through whatever the issues are. And usually I can see what's bothering them before they come to me because I'm looking at their chart and I see what's going on. But when this person comes to me, what I think you can get out of a personal astrology reading with your entire birth chart, not just your sun sign. And for those that don't know, your sun sign is like when you're going, oh, I'm a Libra, I'm a Scorpio, I'm a Capricorn. That's where the sun was at that time of the year. But all the other planets are in signs too, and they're not always the same sign as your sun. So there's a big mix of stuff going on in your chart. And I look at that thing, and I can tell what a person's strengths are, where they have natural skills, where they can trust themselves, where it's going to flow easily for them. And I can also see the areas in the chart where it's going to be a little more of a challenge, and maybe they want to pay attention more. Maybe they want to realize they've got a few things to learn in these particular areas. And ideally, if I do a good job, I show the person how they can take their strengths and skills and apply them to their challenges and find a way to work it out. Sometimes you talk to somebody and in their lives, they've always done like, well, A, then B, then C. And it always goes wrong for them. And sometimes you can look at the chart and say, you know what, do B first, because then A and C will make more sense to you. Because you'll realize sometimes that challenge in their chart is they need to flip what they're doing and they need to do something somewhat differently so that it doesn't quite work out the same exact way every time. Excuse me, I had a little drink there. The other thing, too, what I find fascinating is that I divide charts into personal planets and generational planets. And as I mentioned earlier, generational planets, you have things like the baby boom generation, the me generation, the millennials, the Generation X, and they all have outer planets that match up. as I said, everybody born from about 1949 to about 1960, maybe even a little longer than that, has Pluto in Leo. So there's a generation with Pluto in Leo, so that would be considered a generational planet along with Uranus and Neptune because they move so slowly. But then our personal planets interact with the generational planets. So what's a good way to put this? I might be somebody that rebels against all the changes that my generation is doing. And that might show up in my chart with maybe a lot of oppositions to the generational planets, like maybe Pluto's in Leo and my son's in Aquarius. So I'm pulling in the opposite direction. Or I might be somebody born with my sun conjunct Pluto in Leo or trine Pluto in Leo, and I roll right with my generation and what it's trying to pull off. So charts give us a lot of personality quotients and skills and abilities, and then we have to also look at how we respond to the particular issues of our generation, whatever it might be. And that's kind of the fun part. Some of the relatively recently, from 1988 about 1993 or 4, Neptune and Uranus were conjunct in Capricorn. So you have a little micro generation there, and they're all dealing with Neptune and Uranus conjunct in Capricorn. And that's a real challenge because Neptune and Uranus are about as far from Capricorn as you can possibly get. Neptune is about spirituality, a certain kind of nebulous quality. Can't really pin things down with Neptune because it's not a physical planet. It doesn't rule the physical. It rules the things you can't grab onto, the gossamer things, the things that you can't prove, reincarnation, spirituality, all those things. Uranus is about sudden change and new ideas and freedom. Capricorn, it doesn't have to be, but is often stereotyped as kind of the old fart of the zodiac because they're into structure, they're into tradition when it works. They're always very practical. They're not into tradition for tradition's sake, but they like things that work a certain way. They want to do them again if they keep working. They're not necessarily into wild new ideas, and they're a very physical earth-based sign, so they're not into spirituality necessarily. So now you have a conundrum that this generation has to find some way to express their spirituality and their freedom-loving, disruptive abilities in a practical and efficient way. And what I've been seeing happening in these kids, I say kids, they're getting to be in their 20s now, and 20s and 25s, and they're turning up as my clients. And what I've discovered is that many of them are seeking a practical use of spirituality. And I think part of what we're seeing now is how I became an astrologer in 1986. In the 33 years since then, I have seen Reiki explode. I'm a Reiki level 2 myself. I've seen more astrologists turn up than ever before, tarot cards. The spiritual curiosity has blossomed exponentially. Back I used to joke back in 86, Reiki was this strange alien thing. Now, honestly, among my friends, you can't throw a stick without hitting somebody that knows how to do Reiki because they've taken training. Crystals have become more important. All these things have become more important to us. And what we're seeing also socially is a lot of people consider themselves spiritual but don't have a religion, which is part of that freedom kind of quality. As a matter of fact, I always tell people, you should put together your own spirituality. One size doesn't fit all. So that, and I'm not knocking Catholicism or Judaism or Buddhism or Jainism or anything else. But what I am talking about is that we need to customize things to fit ourselves. This is part, to me, of the Aquarian age. Everything is uniquely about us in a funny kind of a way as we serve the world. It's our own particular way of doing it. So we're seeing this Neptune-Uranus conjunct in Capricorn generation. They come to me. They want to know how to meditate better. They want to know what's my best spiritual discipline. And they don't want to go up in the hills and meditate for 12 years and come back enlightened. They want to have the spirituality in their hands on a daily basis. They want to know how to use their intuition on a daily basis. So they're really taking a practical use to all these new ideas. The healthier ones have learned to sort of merge the Capricorn practicality and efficiency and usefulness with the spiritual and mystical and challenging new ideas. The first thing they're trying to do is make them useful and make them work, so to speak. Work is a great word associated with Capricorns. So one of the things I learn when people come to me, I look at their chart, and a transiting planet, for those that don't know what that means, when you're born, your chart is kind of locked in stone. You're born with Mars at 8 degrees Scorpio. It stays at 8 degrees Scorpio your entire life as your birth chart. But Mars keeps moving. So does Jupiter, so does Pluto. And what happens at some point is one of these planets will transit or cross over one of the planets in your personal chart. And what happens then is that particular planet adds its flavor to your natal planet. And you go through a period when you have issues and ideas that you have to work on. Now, I want to say, I don't make predictions, and the better astrologers don't make predictions. What we do, though, are offer forecasts. The same way a weatherman might say, hey, it's going to snow over the next 3 days. Well, you can change your mind. You can stay home and not go outside. You can have food ordered in. You can bundle up and go outside and make snowmen. Or you can say it's snowing tomorrow and grab a plane to Florida and get the hell out of here. So free will is always involved. But an astrologer can forecast the qualities of an upcoming period of time. So one of the examples, when Saturn transits a particular planet, Saturn is about how we limit ourselves, how we are efficient, how we are it's connected with Capricorn, how we're efficient, how we cut the crap out of our lives. So whenever it crosses a particular planet, it's going to look at that planet's tendencies and say, how do I cut the crap out of this? How do I get focused here? So if Saturn crosses over Mars, which is how we take action and how we get things accomplished, it can do one of two things. It can stifle us, and we get very frustrated because I can't get anything done. Saturn's holding me back. Or we can cooperate with Saturn and realize that we're trying to do too many things at once, or maybe we're trying too hard, and we need to use Saturn to focus, cut out the crap, and aim our Mars. And actually, people that have Saturn on their Mars, if they have their focus ready, can accomplish tremendous amounts of stuff, but it's got to be focused in a practical way. If Saturn crosses over your moon, which can often be about your emotions, your mom, your home, your deeply emotional side, it may be time to throw out some stuff, some emotional baggage you've been carrying with you. Maybe you grew up always believing that, maybe your parents, maybe your mom always beat up your dad and treated him miserable. So you grow up believing that, well, in relationships, women are supposed to beat up men and treat them miserably. Well, Saturn's going to come along and say that's not true. That's what you believe, but that's not real. And Saturn on your moon will force you to kind of reassess that and cut out the stuff that you don't need. It can also affect your house because the moon can also rule your home. So Saturn can also indicate that it may be time to make repairs to your house. It may be time to take stock of your house. It may be time to move. Probably not with Saturn, but it could be because maybe the house is too big now and you have to cut down to smaller. Something needs to be pulled in and reinforced and made more practical. So, and that's one simple example. Jupiter is another example. Jupiter is the planet of expansion and growth. And when it passes over a planet, it has the exact opposite effect of Saturn in many ways. Pluto is on your moon. It's a period of time when you become more open emotionally, open to new ideas. I often call Jupiter transits kind of like go back to school transits. It's time to learn something new. You don't have to literally go back to school, but it is a time to appreciate that and go back and learn new things. It's crossing over your Mars. It's time to take on some new jobs and new skills. It's crossing over your Venus. You might fall in love with somebody new. Or you might renew your love for the person you have and expand it out further, and the relationship might grow. So every planet symbolizes a certain change in your life when it crosses a sensitive spot in your chart. As a matter of fact, there's two different kinds of transits. There's transits to other planets. So, for example, Saturn might cross your Sun and your Mercury and your Venus and your Mars. And that, depending upon your chart, can happen at any point in your life. It's not on a regular scheduled. It is in the sense it'll happen every 29 years, but it's not in a regular schedule. But then we have transits to their own positions. Now, what I mean by that is every 12 years, Jupiter goes around the solar system. So every 12 years, it returns to exactly where your own Jupiter is. And that's called a Jupiter return. And a Jupiter return is literally a time in general to open up and try something new and try something different all over the place, not just for one particular planet. And it happens every 12 years. So usually you go through it, 5 or 6 or maybe 7 times in your life, depending upon how long you hang out here. A Saturn return is the same thing. Saturn returns to where it was when you were born. And a Saturn return is a little bit heavier, a little more serious. Obviously, it happens 2 to 3 times in your life, depending upon how long you live. And if you make it up to 120, you'll get your 4th Saturn return. I haven't got a lot of experience with that one. But the first Saturn return is very important because that is when you become a grown-up according to astrology. Okay, now let me explain. Saturn can symbolize in our chart all of the things that the rules we believe in that we think are facts, which is echoing back to what I said earlier. You may grow up with some beliefs from your childhood that aren't really true, but you cling to them. They're family patterns. They're ways of behaving that only you perhaps understand because you come from that particular family. Saturn also represents authority because it represents how we structure our lives. So for the first 28 to 29 years of our lives, we get most of our authority from outside us. It's our school teachers, it's our parents, it's our neighbors, it's the police, it's the courts, it's the pope, the priest, the minister, the rabbi, whoever it is. All of them impose on us their rules and regulations. And we need rules and regulations of some kind, and so we take them on. Well, Saturn return is when Saturn gets back to your natal Saturn, and now it's time to become your own authority. Now it's time to grow up. And it's funny, it's not when you're 21 or 18, which is our legal thing in our you can vote at 20, you can drink liquor at 21, you can vote at 18. But the Saturn return gives us all of our 20s to run around and make mistakes and screw up and finally learn some additional lessons so that when our Saturn return comes, ideally we're ready to own our lives and own our path. And often with a Saturn return, excuse me, if you're not on your path and you've perhaps taken a detour in a direction that isn't necessarily your best direction, it will put you back on your path one way or the other. One example for me, I was being an art director and I was doing well with it. I mean, all things considered, but Saturn return is when I got, as I put it, dragged into astrology, kicking and screaming, because as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't something I necessarily believed in. And the next thing I know, by the end of my Saturn return, I'm a professional astrologer and have been since. So sometimes Saturn return around 29 will create a corrective energy that then you respond to. I mean, I could have ignored it. I could have walked another direction, and I might have struggled a bit more. Saturn's not going to punish me, but if you're not cooperating with the planet or what it symbolizes, it's not necessarily going to flow as smoothly as you'd like. Now, the thing about this is the second Saturn return when you're around 58 or 59, and this is a little different. The second Saturn return is about Act 1 is over, and it's time for Act 2. Now, in the older days, a lot of people died shortly after their second Saturn return. The early 60s was the early 60s, meaning your age, not the decade. A lot of people died by the time they were 65. It's one of the reasons Social Security was set to kick in at 65 back when FDR put it on, is a lot of people who don't make it past 60 and 65. But now we're living longer, so now it becomes a time to assess What are we going to do now? It is getting time to be retired from maybe the main career of your life, but what are you going to do now? Where are you going with this? You're going to take up a different career. You're going to launch yourself in a different direction. That's the potential of the second Saturn return. The third Saturn return, you're like in your mid-80s, and I don't know what. I haven't had a lot of experience with them, so I can't say something about it. So what I'm sort of describing here is there's certain transits that happen at the same time for everybody, because everybody's Saturn returns around 28 years old. Everybody's Jupiter returns every 12 years. Everybody's Uranus returns every 85 years. You might not make it to your Uranus return. And Jupiter and not Jupiter, Neptune and Pluto, forget it. Actually, America is getting its Pluto return in the next few years. And again, I'm not a mundane astrologer. I tend to prefer working mostly with people in the natal charts. But there's a lot of astrologers looking at what's going on in our country right now and saying this is a Pluto return. Pluto is how we transform, how we grow. It can be about dictatorship. It can be about forces beyond your control. And ideally about evolution and transformation. And you can see, regardless of how you feel about politics, in the past couple of years, things have been exploding all over the place. Cooperation's gone out the window, and all these people are struggling and fighting with each other. And the question becomes for some astrologers, well, what's going to happen to America when the Pluto return finally arrives completely in a couple of years, because Pluto moves very slowly, and then where are we going afterwards? There's definitely going to be some form of transformation in America after the Pluto return and during the Pluto return. So we'll have to see what happens at that point. So these are some of the things that I use astrology for. Now, I will say there are many branches of astrology, and I don't participate in all of them. Medical astrology is something I'm trying to learn lately because it's become very useful. There are people who specialize strictly in the medical qualities of astrology. What kind of health problems you have. If you're having a health problem, I knew this one woman, she developed cancer, and I have a friend of mine who's a medical astrologer, and I grab him whenever necessary to figure things out if I'm sort of stuck. And we saw that Pluto was transiting her sun. It was suggesting some heavy-duty stuff was coming up. And he said that at some point she could choose to stay here or choose to go, because the Pluto transit to her sun was kind of heavy. And since she's already tended to manifest it as Cancer, the question became, what do you do now? And there were other things in her chart that suggested she had spent most of her life doing for everybody else. And probably the best thing for her to do now for her health, besides, of course, seeing doctors and the medical establishment, I'm not in any way dismissing them, would be for her to celebrate herself and do things in a selfish manner and be more self-oriented. Well, she chose not to do that. She actually passed about 6 or 8 months afterwards, and that was the choice she made. But that's some of the stuff you can learn about, when using medical astrology. And I'm not saying, by the way, if you're looking at your chart and you're going, oh my God, Pluto's going to hit my sun, I'm going to get cancer. No, that's not what I'm saying. Everybody's chart is unique and different. And when we were looking at this woman's chart, we looked at all of her planets and all the things that were going on in her chart. And that's how we came up with the particular diagnosis we had. Now, we already knew she had cancer, so we were looking for where that was in her chart and how that was symbolically turning up in the transits of her chart. So that was what we did with it. So I'm not saying everybody with Pluto on their sun gets cancer. So chill out. I'm actually getting a heavy-duty Pluto transit last year and the next couple of years. And it's interesting that symbolically, every sign rules certain parts of the body. And Capricorn rules the knees. And the knees can be symbolic of flexibility. Capricorn rules bones and structure because, as I mentioned earlier, Saturn and Capricorn are very similar. It's about structure, bones, focus. So Pluto was on my Venus and entering my castling my sun. It's beginning to. And I end up having to have partial knee replacement surgery on my right knee. And on one level, 2 years ago, I got hit by a car when I was crossing the street, and that led to knee issues. On another more metaphysical, metaphorical level, I'm a stubborn, rigid Capricorn. We can be prone to arthritis. Why? Because it's stiffening. Capricorns have trouble being flexible at times. So I end up getting a partial knee replacement. And the symbolism is not lost on me. I mean, clearly it's time for me to be more flexible, time to be more open-minded about things. And I'm endeavoring to do that because I have another knee I want to keep healthy and happy. So everybody's medical diagnosis is very specific to their chart. Not every Capricorn gets arthritis. Not every Cancer gets stomach problems, but there are those tendencies. One of the things I find when I look at a person's chart and look at their health situation is I look for the illnesses they will tend to get when they are not completely on their path or completely connected to the universe in some way, however you wish to put it. We have it's a funny way to put it, we have our favorite ways of getting sick. And so if we're missing the point and we're having trouble, each chart will indicate particular ways that people will manifest their spiritual malaise in a physical way. And in my case, it was my knees and my flexibility. And my teeth, actually. I'm having a lot of teeth work done now because the Capricorn is teeth and structure. So these are some of the ways that medical astrology can work. And there's also a form of astrology called horary, which is spelled with an H, Horary. And it's probably the closest astrology gets to what you would call fortune telling. And it's been around for a long, long time. Part of it was that I believe many people didn't originally know their birth times. So horary astrology sprung up as a solution looking for answers to questions. So what might happen is I might walk up to an astrologer and say, I just went on a job interview. Am I going to get the job? And the astrologer will look at the moment the question was asked. Maybe it was like 2:45 in the afternoon on February 12th, 2019. And they'll set up a chart for that exact moment. And there's a completely different way to read the chart. And they'll be able to use this chart to give an answer. Yes, you'll get the job. No, you won't. Or sometimes the chart comes up and it's too early to ask the question. And that also clearly comes up. People use horary charts for I lost my earring. Am I going to find it? Basic kind of questions that you wouldn't necessarily look to your natal chart. I find natal chart reading is really much more about, your soul's path, your life, your choices in life, whereas horary is kind of like, is this job going to go well? Is my marriage going to go well? Is this person I just met, am I going to fall in love with them? Is it going to work out? I'm not inclined to use horary, but I've seen people use it, and I've seen it be extraordinarily accurate. I just tend to specialize in natal astrology and personal choices. So, because free will, I always believe in free will. And as I mentioned earlier, the choices are there. When I look at my chart, the same things that made me an art director. I have Venus and Neptune in strong positions, and Venus is about art and beauty and relating to people, and Neptune can be about creativity and inspiration, and Uranus is connected in there, so it's about sudden inspiration. And it made me an art director, but you could take those same planets and apply them to anybody doing mystical stuff. So I ended up becoming an astrologer. So the same chart can manifest in different ways depending upon a person's choices, which is something but either way, I'm going to have to manifest that Neptune and Uranus and Venus in some way that works in harmony, ideally, with the particular symbols of what they stand for. I could have gone into other directions too. Of course, I could have gone in a negative way too. Neptune square my Venus, like in an opposite Uranus, you're getting somebody that can be a bull in a china shop, that can be abrasive, somebody that can be hung up on drugs or alcohol, because when Neptune's not being spiritual, it still denies the physical world. And the other way of denying the physical world is drugs and alcohol and lies and deceit, because those are the two sides of Neptune. Every planet and every sign has a positive manifestation and a negative manifestation, or let's be optimistic, a less than desirable manifestation. And you want to try to encourage people to find the healthiest way to look at their charts and to look at themselves. I find one of the best uses of astrology is if you really know yourself pretty well. An astrology reading shouldn't shock you, because everything you are is in the chart. And if you know yourself pretty well, it's like, well, yeah, I do that. Yeah, that does make sense. What astrology will do is give you a different way of looking at it. And sometimes that helps an awful lot. If you always do A, B, C, and then one day somebody comes along and says CBA, and it looks completely different. It's the same thing, but it looks different. And you perceive it in a different way, and you can change your attitude about it. Then that's the wonderful thing about astrology. You can look at yourself in a new way. The same things. It's always you. It's not like you're suddenly not you, but you look at yourself in a new way, and a new way of perceiving, what you can and cannot do. For some people, there's that problem in your life, and you're always having that problem. Well, you can say, well, look, you see, your Saturn is squaring your Venus. You're not comfortable talking to people. Saturn can be restrictions. Venus is how we relate to people, and a square is a difficult relationship. So they may automatically be pulling back from people, and then you discover that people don't trust them and don't seem to like them, and then they get mad and they go, well, see, people don't trust me. It's like, yeah, but it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because your own indication of a certain amount of fear of other people and holding back of other people made them turn and say, well, this guy don't even want to talk to us, so the hell with him. So ideally in a situation like that, I might turn to somebody and say, well, you've got to take some extra steps. I know you might not be comfortable around other people. I know you may not be wary of them. So take baby steps. But don't just sit there and lock the door and say, I'm not going out and hanging out with people, because it's going to cripple you in the long run, because we need other people. Much as we can't stand other people sometimes, we need other people, and we need to connect to other people. And so those are the kind of ways you might look at a problem in the chart. I might look at somebody with that moon square Mars, I said earlier, and they have a temper. And I might say, the next time you get emotionally upset, take a few deep breaths. Assess the situation before you start defending yourself or fighting. Does this really have to be a fight? Can this be worked out differently? Is there another area that you can turn to find a way to compromise instead of fighting all the time? These are the ways, ideally, you help somebody learn and grow and evolve with their chart. I actually know people who, actually one of the heads of the NCGR here in New York, which is the National Council for Geocosmic Research. It's an astrologers organization. One of the gentlemen that runs it actually is a professional counselor, psychologist, who uses astrology in his day-to-day practice as a way of connecting to the problems right away and then dealing with them and finding solutions. So it could be used in a purely therapeutic, psychological way. And that's actually something that many astrologers will do. I've certainly picked up, copies of Jung and sociological texts to understand how people behave, because that's got to be added into my bag of skills and tools. Because it's one thing to say, oh, well, you've got Mars square moon, you've got a temper, now get out of here. That doesn't really help anybody. And I have met some astrologers that work that way. I remember, years and years ago, I had a student who she did a guy's reading, and I participated in it because I was sort of there to be her coach or whatever you want to call it while she's doing it. And she's telling this guy, like, well, you can't trust your friends. And I'm like, wait a minute. How is that helpful or useful to anybody to tell them they can't trust their friends? So I would look at the same thing. In this particular case, I think it was Neptune was squaring Venus. So he had Neptune was given trouble perceiving other people, and Neptune can bring you in an idealistic way. It can make you somewhat gullible at times. So I was able to turn to him and say, look, you know what? You really like your friends, and you tend to be really idealistic about them, and you tend to believe anything they tell you. Slow down. When somebody tells you something that sounds really fantastic, slow down, take a deep breath, look it over. Don't assume everybody's telling you the wonderful truths, but just take some time. It's not that you can't trust your friends, but that you need to tune in a little better. Excuse me. You need to tune in a little better and focus on who they really are, not the fantasies you have of who they are, because they're your friend and they're wonderful and all this other stuff. So a large part of astrology is really understanding people and how they behave. It's all well and good to look at a chart and say, oh, Mercury is conjunct Jupiter. You can't stop talking and thinking. Well, then you've got to find a way to help somebody deal with that and not just say, good luck, Charlie, with it. And sometimes you'll be surprised by people. This is something I've learned. There's a couple of incidents I've learned over the years where the client, how do I put this? Astrology always works. Sometimes the astrologer hasn't gotten it yet in terms of certain particular areas. Early on in my career, I remember doing a woman's chart. And in this particular case, fortunately, I was in her apartment and I did her reading. And part of what was in the chart was that writing and communications were very important to her. So I'm like, do you write on your job? No. Do you write on your own? No. Do you write fiction? No. She didn't write. She wasn't in communications. And I'm kind of baffled because in the back of my head, I'm thinking she's supposed to be a writer. And then I look over at her bookcases and I notice there's a lot of books there. And there's 2 or 3 shelves of books that don't have any titles. They're blank spines. And I guess on an intuitive kind of leap, I just said, what are those? And she says, oh, those are my journals. I said, really? She said, yes, I write in them every night for an hour before I go to sleep. She's got like 20 years of journals there, and she's telling me she doesn't write. But there it was. And so sometimes the mystery is for the astrologer to figure out, how did you manifest this? It's one thing to understand the symbols. To go back to the favorite, I talk about the moon and Mars. Okay, emotions and anger are going to have trouble with each other. How does it manifest? I had another client about 5-6 years ago. It was very clear in her chart that she had a very absent mother who was very difficult to connect to, and a very kind of commanding mother who was very authoritarian. And I'm sitting there and I can't put the two of these together. How do you have a non-existent mother who's authoritarian? And so I simply asked her, I said, I'm getting confusing readings here. How is it possible? And she said, oh, I can explain that. I was adopted. Her mother gave her up at birth, and the woman who adopted her was very kind of Saturnine and Capricorn and very discipline-oriented. And she even told me that at one point she sought out her birth mother, and her birth mother met her privately at some restaurant somewhere, and her birth mother was so happy that she turned out to be a lovely young lady, and she's so glad that things worked out. But you can never be part of my life because I can't admit that you exist. My culture and my people will never accept this. So her birth mother, went on her Neptunian way and faded away from her life again. So she actually had a mother that was not there and a mother that was disciplinarian at the same time. And again, that was my shortcoming. As an astrologer, not necessarily recognizing how the person was manifesting these particular skills. And sometimes it becomes a laugh riot because I remember I did this husband and wife together, and the guy's chart indicated that he was a very contrary kind of a person. He was very argumentative, and he would always challenge other people. And try to tell somebody who's argumentative that they're argumentative, and it becomes a Monty Python routine, okay? It's like, well, you're argumentative. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. It's like, no, you tend to take the other side. I do not. Yes, you do. Finally, thank God, his wife said, dear, stop. You do this all the time. And I had to laugh. I would have been there all night going, yes, you do. No, you don't. Yes, you do. No, you don't. And I didn't step back and realize he's doing exactly what I'm saying he does. So again, it's not astrology that ever fails. It's, if anything, it's the astrologer that fails, because you miss the clues and the understanding of what's going on in the chart. One more example. The sun is symbolizes who you basically are. It's kind of the foundation of who you are. It's how you think, how you understand yourself. The moon symbolizes kind of your subconscious, your emotional side, and the sun and the moon are often in different signs, so you might feel one way and you might think another way. And so that's sometimes when we talk about when we're torn between a couple of decisions, I feel that I want to do this and I think I want to do that. That's the sun and the moon often in a chart wrestling with each other. But if you have the sun and the moon conjunct in the same sign on top of each other, your inner and outer self are completely merged. There's no separation. You don't think one way and feel the other way. You think and feel the same way. So on one level, these people become very, very good at rolling with whatever happens. And they have no problems of they're very single-minded. This is what I feel, this is what I think, and this is what I'm going for. And they can't always stand outside themselves and see themselves the way some of us can do. Again, fortunately, I was doing a husband and wife reading, and I was trying to tell the wife that she can't stand outside herself and see herself. And she said, I don't understand what you mean. And after I explained it 2 or 3 times, and this is an early case of mine or a client of mine, the husband again turned to me and said, you realize you're never going to be able to explain this to her. And I realized that, of course not, because she doesn't even understand what I'm talking about, because she can't do it. It's like trying to explain the color red to a blind person, So these are some of the things that you learn over the years as an astrologer, that it's up to you to understand the chart. The answers are there, and you, if you can find them, you can work with them, and you can help people and turn them around. Ideally, turn them around, or at least give them a direction to turn them around and help heal whatever their struggle is in their particular chart. So that's kind of in a nutshell how I feel about a lot of astrology. You had mentioned. Go ahead.
I was very impressed with everything you had to put there. I looked at astrology a whole new way now listening to that, because you went into some things that frankly, I don't think I've ever heard astrologers go into in regards to past events on having to tie into this alignment and that alignment, and very, very enlightening indeed.
Thank you.
I'd like to, well, first of all, you can finish up what you were about to say before I interrupted you there. It's not very often I get to have a guest on who can keep talking nonstop without the need for me to filibuster. So that was wonderful that you were able to get in a nice opening there. And but now maybe there's time for some questions. And my first question after you finish saying what you wanted to say there, which astrology do you see as more worthwhile to look at? Mainstream tropical, Western, or the sidereal kind, which goes by the fixed position of the stars and not the path of the sun across the ecliptic as mainstream Western tropical does?
Well, I prefer tropical Western, and here's the way it looks at it. And for anybody that doesn't understand, thousands and thousands of years ago, when astrology was first codified, we identified constellations in the sky as connecting to a particular sign. So Aries, and at that point, 5,000 years ago, the beginning of spring was when the constellation Aries was rising with the sun. Okay, but something called the wobble of the Earth on its axis gives you the stars move slowly. This is the same thing that gives us the ages: the age of Pisces, the age of Aries, the age of Aquarius. So what's happened over the last 5,000 years is that the constellations have moved out of sync with our solar calendar of us going around the planet. So technically speaking, the constellation Aries no longer rises with the sun during the period of Aries in tropical Western astrology. In sidereal astrology, it does, and they continue to follow the stars. So technically, if you're a Westerner and you go, I'm a Capricorn, in sidereal or Vedic astrology, as it's called in India, you're not a Capricorn, you're a Sagittarius, and everything's kind of moved back by one sign. I will say that I have seen sidereal Vedic astrologers do wonderful chart readings, so I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that system. But when I look at the symbolism of the planets and the signs in particular, to me, they connect so clearly with the seasons. And the reason it's called tropical is because it's based upon the Earth. It's tropical astrology is Earth-based, whereas sidereal astrology, sidereal meaning stars, is literally star-based. So the beginning of spring was the beginning of Aries, and it still is in tropical. And what I look at, well, signs can be divided into cardinal, fixed, and mutable. And cardinal signs tend to be initiators. Fixed signs tend to be maintainers, and mutable signs tend to kind of like do it both ways, break it up, do different things. All the cardinal signs, the initiating signs in tropical astrology, begin a season. They begin in the equinox or the solstice. So it makes sense to me that the initiating signs, the cardinal signs, begin a season. And the year begins in spring, which is what we just began like an hour ago, because we just had the spring equinox. And so Aries makes sense. Aries is the newborn baby. A lot of energy of Aries is very much like a newborn child. Aries does whatever they want to do. They want to run for it. I'm going to do this. I want to do that. And like a child, you got to grab them. It's like, no, the stove is hot. No, don't run, jump in the pool. You don't know how to swim yet. Because Aries just wants to do stuff. And that's the beginning of the year. And that's the beginning of life. And Cancer starts the summer. Libra starts the fall. And Capricorn starts the winter. And all of them are cardinal signs. And but let's go through this, if you don't mind, sign by sign. Aries is a fire sign. The first fire sign, it's very self-oriented and it's action-oriented because all fire signs are action-oriented. The next sign is Taurus. It's an earth sign. It's a fixed sign. So the spring has started, the weather's warmed up, and Taurus just wants to enjoy itself, sitting out in the field, chewing the grass, hanging out, enjoying how wonderful life feels. Nothing needs to change. It's a very fixed sign. The fixed signs are all in the middle of a season. So once the season starts, we get about a month there where the weather kind of stays the same up until recently. We're not even going to get into polar vortexes and all this stuff right now. And then it goes to a mutable sign, which is Gemini. And now things are changing. The weather's changing. It's beginning to get towards summer. And Gemini is a sign that's, I think, it's an air sign. And the first four signs are very selfish signs. Selfish in the sense that they are self-oriented. So you get to Cancer, it's a water sign, and it's all about I feel. And it starts the summer because it's warm now. You've done all your planting. While the food is growing, or the crops are growing, you're going to sit there and build a home, start a family, whatever it is. And Cancer is very much symbolic of that. Well, the next four signs now repeat the same elements with somebody else involved. So you're back to a fire sign. Well, now Leo wants to do whatever Leo wants to do, just like Aries, except Leo wants somebody watching. Leo wants an audience. So somebody else has to be involved. And Leo's the dog days of summer, as they say. It's really hot. Farming is still, the plants are growing. You don't have to do a lot. So you start, you set up your home. Now you're going to start goofing around and playing and paying attention to each other. And then we move into, and it's a fixed sign. It's the middle of a season. We move into Virgo. And Virgo is also an efficient earth sign. But instead of being self-oriented like Taurus that wants to just get stuff and enjoy its own pleasure and physicality, Virgo now wants to improve things. Virgo is about purifying things. That's why you find a lot of Virgos who are nurses, who are pharmacists, people who are healers are often Virgos because they're trying to bring some sort of a practical use to someone else. Accountants, you'll find a lot of Virgo accountants too, because they're all about getting things just so. And then you move into the next sign, the Libra, which begins fall. And it's an air sign, and it likes to think, just like Gemini likes to think. But now it thinks of itself as half of something. It's about balance and harmony. Libra is the only sign that isn't a living thing. Libra is a scale, and it's a machine, and there's this kind of balance that needs to be kept. And we're moving into harvest season at this point. You're going to have to connect to other people and bring the harvest in. You've got to come together as one-to-one. And I'm going back to harvest because this was all codified centuries ago when we lived in synchronicity and harmony with the nature. And so we get past Libra, we get into Scorpio. It's a water sign. It wants to feel everything. It wants to feel as if it is part of somebody else emotionally. This is one of the reasons Scorpio terrifies all of us. We don't even know our own emotions, much less having somebody merge with our emotions. But there's this intensity about Scorpio, and it's getting later in the year. Crops have been harvested, and it's time to start make plans for the upcoming year. So you go into Sagittarius. It's a fire sign. It too wants to do things. But now Sagittarius wants to do it everywhere. Sagittarius is about traveling to different places, both physically and metaphorically. Sagittarius is about higher education, higher spirituality. What's over the side of that hill? What's across that ocean? What's over there? That's an expansion and opening out. And then, so it involves the world now. The last 4 signs involve the same elements in relationship to the world. So your next sign coming up is the beginning of winter, and it's Capricorn. Capricorn is very practical. They just want to run everything. Okay, they want to control the world and make sure it functions properly. And Capricorn is about long-term planning, and it makes perfect sense, again, that it begins winter, because believe me, if you don't plan at the beginning of winter, you're not going to survive winter. Okay, if you haven't done canning, if you haven't baked things and saved things and put food away to get you and gotten the logs ready to put in your fireplace over the winter, you're not going to survive. So Capricorn is about long-term planning and practical qualities and tradition to a degree. And it's a cardinal sign starting the season. Then we go to the fixed sign Aquarius. Well, now we're snowed in. There's nothing to do. What do we do now? And we start thinking, because Aquarius is a thinking sign, and it starts thinking about the world. What can I do for the world? How can we improve the world? What can I build that will help the world be a better place? Who's going to go bring the water back to the village? How are we going to set up the rules? Because it's an air sign. And then we move into Pisces, the end of the year, and emotionally, now they're merging with the entire universe. Pisces feels everybody's feelings. And this, too, it's not just the cycle of the year, which is one of the reasons I like tropical astrology. It's also the cycle of life. We start out the first third of our lives very selfish with children. I want, I feel, I think, me need. We get into like the next wave of like, wait, there are other people out there. Maybe you start dating, maybe you start going out and interact with friends and whatnot. And then finally you get to maturity and the world suddenly becomes your playground and your stage, and not just your own ego. You become aware of your place in the world. And finally, the more and more aware you become of the universe and the world, well, Pisces just expands you out, and you die and you dissolve back into the universe until you're reborn as a little baby Aries again. So there's this cycle. There's 2 overlapping cycles here. I see the seasonal cycle that happens every year from the beginning of spring. I mean, irises that come poking through the snow. It's not even warmed up enough yet. And some of those plants that just start coming through anyway. That's your Aries energy. I don't care who's stopping me. I'm going to do what I want to do. And that begins your life cycle as a baby and the yearly cycle. So that's one of the reasons I tend to prefer tropical, because the metaphors work better than me. I'm not as schooled in Vedic and sidereal astrology. Vedic, which is the Indian version of sidereal astrology, also doesn't use any of the outer planets. They stop at Saturn. And as I understand it, the belief is that astrology for them is about the visible universe. What can you see? That's what matters. And it's kind of hard to see Uranus. You can if you know what you're looking for in the sky. But Pluto and Neptune, forget it. You're not going to easily see them. And there's actually some planets even further out there that we're not even have yet to incorporate into astrology. So they stop at Saturn, and I do find that for me, and I'm not authority on Vedic, but I find Vedic to be more fate-oriented, and there isn't quite as much free will. I'm often seen when I go to astrology, Vedic astrology chat boards, I'm born with Mars in Lenga, Mahu, I'm making up the words, and therefore I can never marry a blah, 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 so what should I do? And I don't buy that. I don't buy this, you're doomed to never be able to marry a particular person. So that's my tendency of preferences, and I also think we have evolved as a society. So when we discovered Uranus, it was the planet of freedom. Well, we discovered it when there was the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and suddenly kings were being pulled down for a new form of government. Okay, we discovered Neptune in the 1800s when suddenly it was the Second Great Awakening. It's a spiritual awakening, religions popping up everywhere, theosophy, Rosicrucians, spiritual mediums, seances were happening. So Neptune became a symbol of spirituality. And Pluto turns up in the 1930s when atomic power is discovered, psychotherapy becomes more popular, and fascism and overwhelming governments become a thing. And so now Pluto symbolizes radical transformation, psychology, rebirth, and sometimes forces that you cannot fight against alone, whether it's the mafia, the corporations, the fascists, the dictators, whoever they are. So I like tropical also because it takes into account that we are all evolving as a race, as an entity, as a universe, whatever you want to call it. So that's where I'm coming from regarding that division.
Thank you very much. Of course, I guess it's my personal holiday with Western tropical astrology because I'm in Aries today. For all intents and purposes, will be my holiday, knowing the sun is going in my sign today. And although in sidereal astrology, that's totally different. I am a Pisces in that form of astrology. So different things there. I try to be a little impartial. Although I will say I use Western more every so often. Mastering the Zodiacs, Anthony Picco, who I had as a guest on my show to talk about sidereal. I'll encourage people to listen to that. He talked all about that, and his work comes in handy, I guess, for the weekends especially. So, but anyhow, some other things that are worth discussing. Going away from astrology for just a moment, I don't think you plugged your radio show. I'll let you do that right now. Cosmic Tuesdays. Interesting you say that Tuesday is your favorite day of the week. Now, there's a couple things about Tuesday that are worth pointing out. I took Spanish in school for a little while. Martes is the Spanish word for Tuesday, which pertains to Mars, actually. But the word Tuesday in English is named after Tyr, the Norse god of law, justice, and single combat, which I wonder if you were to connect some links and find any connections because they try to connect mythologies that seem unrelated, and they show no, there's a connection to everything in some way or another. I wonder if Tyr and Aries and Mars, Aries and Mars, Greek, Roman, respectively, the gods of war. Wonder if maybe they're all one and the same. Can you comment on this in any way? And what is it about Tuesday that you find so intriguing? Why of all the days of the week, why that one?
And not only is my show called Cosmic Tuesdays, just to mess with your head, I have it on Monday evenings. But okay. What I like about Tuesday, and it started originally as a sort of a whimsical thing. It's like everybody hates Monday. It's like, oh, we got to get back to work. It's a drag. And by Wednesday, they're calling it hump day. And, by Thursday and Friday, we're panicking because it's the end of the week and we got to get things done. And I just thought Tuesday, it's like the week has started. It's still fresh. We've got Monday out of the way. We've got 3 days yet to get something done. So I like the idea that Tuesday is kind of, you're involved, but you're not quite all the way there yet. You've got time to get things done. There's a crispness to it, a freshness. I just find, like every day of the week, hump day, payday, that's Monday, and we all hate it. Nobody's ever really assigned anything negative to Tuesday. The church hasn't taken it over. You either got Judaism and Saturdays and Christians and Sundays. So Tuesday seemed kind of like the loosest one out there, the most footloose and fancy free. And it's one of the reasons I picked Tuesday as an example. Although the idea of justice in Mars and me being authoritarian Capricorn makes sense. I mean, because I use my show to interview all kinds of people who are not mainstream, astrologers, psychics, aromatherapists, feng shui masters, people who've died, near-death experience, people who've come back. I'm going to have a Native American on in a couple of months to discuss her religion and beliefs. I'm there to expose people to the new not even new, the concepts that they may not be familiar with. So I'm trying to expand the world out, and I could see that connecting with the goddess of justice and wisdom and getting things out there and being aggressive about it. Here, let me interview these people and expose you to them. So I can see a connection to it. If that helps make sense out of it. And incidentally, if you're looking for the show, www.Spreaker, which is the word speaker with an R stuck in there, Spreaker.com/the word show /cosmic-Tuesdays. The show is live every Monday evening from 9:30 Eastern time to 11 o'clock, and then it's immediately archived. So if you go there, you can actually find some of the archives of the people I have interviewed and find out what's coming up next. So that's what I do with Cosmic Tuesdays.
Yeah, also another thing worth plugging here, it seems to be a little while since you've updated it, not since January 23rd, the cosmictuesdays.wordpress.com. Looking at it right here on my screen, and under the title, you write astrology, intuition, spirituality, practicality, metaphysics, and philosophy. Okay, maybe a couple talking points looking at that, but might as well plug that. And do you plan to update that in anytime soon?
Yes, actually, it did fall sort of by the wayside, and I've actually been writing a few pieces that I'll start posting in the next month. I like to build up a little backlog before I start because I hate missing weeks. So once I have 4 or 5 set up, I'm going to start posting again, probably by the end of April. I had started it a few years ago, and then I just sort of ran out of things to say, and then I got I went willingly doing YouTube videos and Zoom videos where I was discussing things. And it's a lot easier than writing, and I also try very hard to write my blog short. As they say, nobody scrolls down below the fold on a lot of websites. So I try to keep my blog post to about 500 words. I want to kind of get in, hit something, and then kind of get out so people finish it and read it and get the whole gist of it. So there's a certain brevity and a focus that somebody, a friend of mine who writes regularly says it's a lot harder to write shorter than write longer, So to cut something down to like a 500-word thing sometimes is a little more of a challenge, because you want to find the way to say it as precisely and concisely as possible. So, yeah, I will be updating it again very soon.
Yeah, I can relate to what you're talking about, like running out of ideas of things to write. That's why I don't post posts on davidike.com's forum, or I used to post on the InfoWars forums and some other forums. I'm kind of out of ideas with that. So, but then I switched to doing 2 radio shows a week, so kind of make up for it. But kind of familiar with that feeling. Going back, we'll get back to some of the things there, looking at some of the subtopics you put under the title there. I want to elaborate on a couple things, but anyhow, before we do that, I think I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I was kind of confused as to why Easter is not this upcoming Sunday, why it's the 21st, because technically if you go by strict timing, then the full moon that's happening later tonight at 9:44 is actually happening after the equinox, which happened earlier at 5:58 Eastern. So is it have to be like a full calendar day according to the laws of the Christian Church, who writes a lot of strict and disgusting laws? It's not even funny, but anyhow, is that just that's the only reason, because it has to be a full day or something?
I would imagine. I mean, I'm looking. No, I'm not the Pope, but I do know that timing was not as precise 500 or 1,000 years ago. So they may very well take a full day, because maybe 500 years ago they wouldn't have known the equinox happened an hour before the full moon. So it might have been more difficult to figure that out. So it might have been just, oh, look, it's a full moon, it's the equinox, we'll do it next time. So I think there's just I don't want to call it sloppy, but I think they're probably following traditions that are no longer as we're not as precise as they could be now. It is kind of unusual to have the full moon literally like 3 hours before we go into spring, or 3-4 hours roughly. I believe. I don't know the exact numbers, but so that's kind of unusual. And I could say that, see the church just figuring, well, we'll just push it a month ahead, So I can't say why they would do that, but I'm thinking older days you didn't put things down to a millisecond. I had a friend of mine rectify my chart, which is a technique in astrology where working backwards from events in your life, you figure out your birth time. And the guy rectified my chart to 12:04 and 58 seconds. And I'm like, well, that's nice work, but I don't think it's going to matter if it's 58 seconds or 59 seconds. So I think sometimes we can get really caught up in the precision. I think the church just probably figured out it's the same day, we'll make it next month or next time around.
Well, yeah, the Gregorian calendar is designed to be sloppy and stupid and to screw with our understanding of consciousness related to time, but that's another story. But getting back to some of this stuff here, Cosmic Tuesdays by Anthony Picco, the sub things. Last one, philosophy. How do you relate to philosophy? Because Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartz, I heard him once say that's philosophy. The only thing it's good for is divide and conquer. Not really in our best interest to take up different philosophies. So what do you have to say about that?
I look at philosophy as actually a way to bring us together. My philosophies tend to be more about acknowledging how we are all one, I'm a big fan of the Seth Material. I'm not going to go deep into it, but he, along with certain religions and whatnot, have pointed out that everything in the universe is one thing, and that we're all parts of it. So I've always felt that the more we can understand that we are not as separate as we seem to be, the more likely we might cooperate. And I often use the analogy of the human body. I'll say, I'm here, I'm Anthony Picco, and I've got bone cells, and I've got nerve cells, and I've got blood cells, and I've got brain cells, and every one of the cells in my body eats, reproduces, poops, dies, and is reborn over and over again, and yet I go on as me, even though it keeps changing. And each one of those cells in my body have different jobs. And I look at the universe in it's a sloppy metaphor, but the closest I can come is we are all cells in the body of God. And I'm using all those terms very loosely when I say God. Seth refers to the universe as all that is, capital A, capital T, capital I. So in a sense, you could think of us all as cells in the body of the universe, and that all of us are here to be unique and different and also cooperate. And that's what I'm always sort of preaching as philosophy, in the sense of as long as we do stuff with love and take care of each other, that's what really matters. Kurt Vonnegut has a great line. He said, "We're here to take care of each other through whatever this is." He didn't even try to figure out what it was, but we're here to take care of each other through whatever this is. And honestly, I guess when you really strip it down, that's what my philosophy is, taking care of each other and helping us through whatever this is. Because, we can fight from here till hell freezes over, if there is a hell, and not come to an agreement about what it is. But the one thing that almost every spiritual belief seems to have, whether we manifest it or not is a different story, but they all talk about, as Jesus said, love one another as I have loved you. We're all supposed to be taking care of each other and loving each other. And that to me is the core of my basic philosophy. And, I fail at it. There's plenty of times I'm cursing people in the street for stepping on my foot or whatever it is. But that's the goal. And that's the thing, is to be kind and to be caring to each other and to try to help us through whatever this thing is. Thank you, Kurt Vonnegut.
Right. Well, when I said philosophy is only meant for divide and conquer, when Andrew Bartz said that, he was talking about having so many different philosophies on a global scale that, any given philosophy can keep a society act as a moral code. But when you put it on a global scale, the only thing it does is create wars and divide and conquer, kind of like the same is true with religions and mythologies. So that's kind of what he meant by that. Not so much.
I can see that, and I definitely agree. Religions divide and conquer. I like to see philosophies as a little bit looser, and not as like I've never heard anybody say you've got to be a follower of Plato or I'll kill you. I have seen people say that about religion, though. So I tend to see philosophy as a bit more peaceful. It's more like mental arguments than picking up the sword and going after somebody.
All right. Another thing you put here, the second thing, intuition. It seems that in some of the astrology and numerology readings that I've been doing over the past year, it hints that most of all of 2018 and also 2019 to some high extent, very high on building intuition for people that really want to seek to build intuition. Well, I've had cases where intuition was seemed to be spot on. Two more prominent examples happened with something in a subject that nobody seems to really care about the spiritual community, and that's predicting sports teams that are going to win championships. Well, one could make the argument that sports is rigged, so it's already scripted, and what I'm doing when I'm making these accurate predictions, all I'm doing is my consciousness is tapping into the information in the Akashic records of the universe saying this is the team that's going to win the championship, and I can read that, so I kind of know who's been scripted to win. But regardless of whether or not the sports is scripted or not and how I'm able to pick it up, the point is I'm still able to access it using like some sort of antenna technology with my consciousness, and it's stressing that a lot of people will be able to do things like that in the near future. So do you have any theories, and is there anything in the astrology and maybe in the numerology, if you can give a take on that says this intuition's prominent in this time?
Well, Yeah, one thing I got to say about intuition is 'cause I don't believe things are locked in stone. I believe that when we're being intuitive, we're picking up the most likely future if things continue exactly as they are. Okay, so that's one of the reasons that when you're talking to a psychic, in my opinion, one of the reasons you're talking to a psychic, the further they go into the future, the less accurate they get, because there's so many things can happen. Okay, and I believe with a psychic, I believe each individual of us, whether it's Tony Picco or Andrew Fisher, we have a larger sense of self. You want to call it your higher self, your higher soul, and there's more going on than we are aware of in our 3rd or 4th dimensional bodies right now. And so I believe to a certain degree, for example, we set up appointments before we're born with other people. Okay, so somebody might say, if you're going down this path by the time you're 30, let's meet up and we'll continue on that path together. Now, you may change your mind when you're 25 and say, I'm not going in that path, and that appointment will not be kept. So what I'm trying to say is that a psychic picks up what is your most likely future. One quick example, years and years ago, I went to a psychic with my girlfriend. Everything the psychic told me, bam, 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 all came true, so to speak, and made sense to me. But I was happy with what she said. I'm going to do this and this. That sounds great. My girlfriend was told that she and I were going to break up and stay friends instead, and that somebody else would come in, and that would be her new boyfriend. And my girlfriend at the time was like, no, I don't want that to happen. And well, the new boyfriend never showed up, and we dated for another couple of years and then broke up and then moved on our separate ways. So that's what I think is going into intuitionally. I don't even know what word to use here. Using intuition, this is what I think is going on. And so it's not always locked in stone, but I definitely think that there's a whole half of our lives that is very aware of everything that's going on, and we've tended to, over the years, to lock ourselves into our left brain instead of our right brain. And I go back to the Seth Material, and Seth talks about how it's supposed to be the other way around. The intuitive brain, intuitive side of your brain, is supposed to be making the decisions, and the logical half is supposed to be carrying out the decisions. Like the intuitive brain says, I have an idea, and the logical brain says, okay, let's do this and this and this. This is how we can put it together. But unfortunately, the logical brain can get fear-based very quickly. So now, instead of just listening to intuition, it decides we have to lock all our doors and put bars on all our windows because you never know when somebody's coming through that might rob you. Well, the intuitive brain always knows when somebody's coming through and is going to rob you. Okay? But if you're not listening to your intuitive brain, then you're just going to build bars and locks and everything to shut you out. So what I'm looking for is a less fear-based world, and I think many of us are eager to find that way because fear has locked us into thousands of years of horrible stuff. And the dominance of the left brain is actually what's given us written history. There's clear evidence that there was plenty of things that happened for a number of thousands of years before anybody wrote anything down. But something about writing things down, being logical, being, left brain has crippled us in some way, because then we start making too many rules and too many blanket decisions and not listening to our intuition, because sometimes your intuition tells you exactly the opposite of what you logically want to do. And we struggle with it because particularly since we've had the so-called age of enlightenment and science, and I'm not knocking science, but we've become very mechanistic, and we've lost our connection to the intuition. I think what's finally happening now, one of the things that's happening, as I mentioned way earlier, Neptune and Uranus in Capricorn in the late 80s, early 90s has imbued an entire generation of about 7 or 8 years there of people who are looking for practical uses for intuition and spirituality. I think for a long time what's been going on in the world is we go to church, we pray, and then we put on our uniform and go kill our enemies. And we've kept them too separated, is my belief. And I think as a result, by bringing them together, if you believe in the divinity of everybody and you believe that everybody is one, then you kill somebody else, you're killing yourself on some level. And I know it can be just looked upon as a convenient mental kind of way of looking at things, but I think it's much more than that. When we injure other people, we injure ourselves in the big picture. And so that to me is what's happening now, is with the Neptune and the Neptune Uranus Capricorn generation is looking for that practical usage. I would also say right now we're right in the middle of Neptune in the sky being in the middle of Pisces. It's about 15, 16 degrees. And it's been that way since around 2010. And Neptune is in its own sign. So the spirit of Neptune, the spirit of spirituality, is in the sign of merging with the entire world and connecting to the entire world. So on one level, the misfiring has been a lot of accusations about lies. Oh, this is all fake news and everything else. And there's other bunch of people coming out to being more spiritual than ever before. And embracing things like tarot cards and numerology and feng shui and EFT and Reiki and, you go on and on and on, medical intuitions, because I think we're reaching a point now. Neptune's in the middle of Capricorn. It's got another 7 years to go to get. No, Neptune's in the middle, of Pisces. It's got another 7 years to get out of that. Pluto is in Capricorn. Capricorn is always about fixing things. Pluto's about transformation. It's been in Capricorn since 2008. So we've had a real kind of shift of energies from about 2008 onwards. And this year, Uranus is moving into Taurus. And whereas it might be a struggle because Uranus wants to change everything and Taurus doesn't want to change anything, when we strip it down to the core meaning, Taurus is about what we value, what we're willing to pay money for, what we think matters. And Uranus is looking to change that. So you may find in the next 7 years, as Uranus goes through Taurus, we may be reassessing and coming up with radical new ideas of what's actually important and what isn't. I think we've kind of milked this money and status thing as far as it can go. Okay. Whether you're convinced that you have to get your child into one of the top 10 schools, or whether having as much money, more money than anybody in the entire world, makes you somehow special. And it clearly hasn't really changed or improved the world, except maybe for 15 or 20 people. So I think we're reaching a period with Neptune spirituality, Capricorn, Pluto correctiveness, and Uranus kind of pushing what we value. We may find a whole new set of values coming over the next few years. So that's all kind of what I think is contributing to this. And it did start, I say, around 2010 when Neptune went into Pisces. It returned home after 160 to 70 years to its own sign. And planets work best in their own sign, most efficiently, So yeah, there's been a big spiritual, both for better or for worse, because I think we're also having people out there who are sticking to what they believe regardless of whether facts show them otherwise, which I think is the whole fake news thing and, denying of climate change and all these other things. Are people going more to the negative side or the less productive side of Neptune in Pisces than the ones that are looking to be more spiritually oriented?
Okay, getting into some of the things that are happening in the upcoming future, because you mentioned Uranus and Taurus up until 2025, something like that. Before then, there's two significant events. Solar eclipses going across America. We've already, the one that happened in August of, I think it was 2017, or August something, 2017. That one went across America from the northwest to the southeast, left to the Charleston area when it left the continental United States. A lot of people have been hearing about the one that's happening April 8th, 2024, which goes like the opposite way across America, southwest to northeast, and the crisscross point of that one and the other one that happened in 2017 is Carbondale, Illinois, which is the place I actually plan to go to on that date. When is the eclipse? I have to think the creator gods are going to let it be a sunny day at the crisscross point there. But people are forgetting that there is actually another significant eclipse that's happening October 14th, 2023. That's also going across America in the north, from the northwest to the southeast, but it's actually covering less of the United States. Actually goes out of Texas into the Gulf of Mexico when it goes out of the continental United States. And this one is actually it's a solar eclipse but it's an annular one, not a total one where you get to see the corona and it's really this is the annular one where you can only see the ring around the sun because of the relative location positioning not allowing for the corona to be seen. It's still a significant eclipse nonetheless, more so than partial ones. And again, that's October 14th, 2023, and not too long before the April 8th, 2024 one. A lot of people signaled the April 8th, 2024 one with signaling the end of the Roman Empire of the modern era that is America, and that is, as a matter of fact, around the same time period as the Pluto thing, Pluto and Capricorn, happening during the American Revolution, which is basically that's the time period you talked about, Pluto going all around the solar system,
Right.
from America being born to the present day. So I've got this information out. Can you connect the dots and tell us what's significant about it?
Well, it's interesting that a lot of it is occurring April to October, and we're talking about Aries and Libra, and all the signs in the zodiac have a polarity to each other. And I think we're dealing with both the directness of needing to have things done, the Aries energy, and the need for harmony, which is the Libra energy. One of the reasons there are polarity is Aries, of course, is I do whatever I want to do, and Libra's because I have to do it with somebody else. Somebody else has to be considered. Something else has to be balanced. I think we're coming up on a period of some real radical change. I think America, I don't want to use heavy stuff like this, but for America to survive, it's going to have to change and transform in some way, shape, or form. Not trying to drag in a particular political thing, but to make America great again is not the kind of energy that's there. The energy is make America great in a new way is the energy that's coming to us, both from Pluto and Capricorn, a transformation for our rebirth as a country. Besides Pluto returning, at the same time, Saturn and Jupiter are going to be in the same degree as Pluto on America's natal chart. So you're going to have both expansion and contraction at the same time. Jupiter wants to bring opening up things and expand things, and Saturn wants to stay practical about it. And of course, all this Capricorn energy wants to fix and heal and organize and make better. We have, I think, the potential at this point to really take America up to another level. And I don't know exactly what that might mean because part of it is Uranus. And, if it's supposed to be expect the unexpected, you can't really make any forecasts about it because you have to see what happens. But it's clear that the old ways aren't working anymore, and that's one of the reasons there's so many, I think, strugglings going on in this country right now between some people not having enough money, some people having too much. Some of the politics, they're reversing a lot of decisions we made all along. We can't go back. It's not a time when we can go back. So for the concept of the United States and America to survive, we have to go forward. And I don't know exactly what that forward is. I think some of the signs have shown for the first time in history, we elected something close to 100 women to Congress and the Senate. And that's a radical shift. Okay. And I don't think it's going to go back soon. And so automatically we're already bringing female energy, in terms of actual women, and not that men and women don't have female and male energy, both of them, but that we're actually bringing women with the female energy with a different way of looking at things than men because of the way we polarize society. So there's a lot of potential there, and I think the ball is beginning to start rolling, and I'm not sure how it will play out. I don't think old regimes never go quietly. So I can't say how it will play out, but there will be some tumultuous qualities, and I think Uranus and Taurus over the next 8 years, which includes, the eclipses you're talking about, the one in 2023 and the one now coming up, is going to be kind of a stubborn energy, and then kind of what's going to happen is I think Uranus is going to push so hard that Uranus has no choice but to that Taurus has no choice but to stampede, because that's what happens with Taurus when they finally. Somebody waves the red flag and the bull goes charging finally, and Taurus will just charge until it's done. So there's a stubbornness, and I think we're probably going to have a number, and I'm using this term very metaphorically, a number of explosions over the next 8 years. Whether they're political explosions, financial explosions, whatever they are, it's going to be kind of this bursting forth of stuff because there's a strong kind of suppressive quality to new stuff right now. trying to take us backwards. And there's a wave coming forward, whether it's 100 women in Congress or I now know 500 more astrologers and psychics than I did 20 years ago. There's a wave on both sides, and they are going to have to work each other out. And I look at Aries and Libra being the axis of most of these eclipses, and we're talking about ideally balanced action. Okay, so we won't suddenly give way to a tidal wave of all new age, new modern miracle stuff, but neither will we be dragged backwards into the way it was, whatever that is for people. So that's my take. I think we're coming up on some big shifts. And just as a side thing that isn't even astrologically based, when the Seth books and the Seth Material were first being written in the late 60s, early 70s, Seth said at the time we were in the middle of a shift with a capital S. And he said shifts happen every now and then. It takes about 150 years. And he compared the last shift to the arrival of the Christ consciousness. So in its own way, Seth channeling talks about the same thing that the ages of Aquarius and Pisces are talking about, and the same thing the eclipses are talking about too, and the way the planets are moving. We're really in a period of really radical updating. And when you think, I'm old enough, I'm 65. My mom, when she was born, couldn't vote, because she was born in 1916. So the right to vote for women isn't even 100 years old yet in our country. 100 years ago, everybody didn't have a car. Everybody didn't have a cell phone. Everybody didn't have electricity. Everybody didn't fly. And I think that's an example of how much things are rapidly accelerating. And I think some people are frightened by the speed of it, and other people are embracing it. So we're headed for a big shift, and it'll probably be disruptive. And I think those people that can adapt and recognize the beauty in it and the benefits of it will be the ones that will flow the best. And I think the ones desperately trying to pull us backwards are not going to really succeed ultimately. But it's just a matter of how peacefully or tumultuously we're going to let this happen, is the way I look at it.
I hope so too. And it seems that there are some sources out there. I'm not really going to give any names out here, but 2024, they say, is when we shouldn't really have to worry about the Illuminati control system anymore, which is great. But will the Humpty Dumpty be able to put itself back together after all the mess was created by the force that's not there anymore? Well, that remains to be seen. And
yeah,
please don't be couch potatoes is basically all I want to say on that one. But moving on to something else here, issue about astrology. When astrological readings clash with each other, I got one particular I'd like to point out here. I have I think it's my Jupiter in whatever house it's in now. My reading for that, I have this document, 84 Future Predictions from numerologist.com, and the Jupiter one said this is a good time for a spiritual awakening up until like December, and that kind of clashes with something that I heard in Chinese astrology. It's the year of the Earth Pig, and relative to all the other signs in Chinese astrology, any year is good for spiritual awakening, but the Earth Pig is one of the least compatible, if not perhaps the least compatible, of all Chinese signs with spiritual enlightenment. So that obviously clashes with my reading about this being a good time for spiritual enlightenment up until the time only about a month and a half before the Earth Pig will come to an end. Now, when people see something like that in astrology, what's your advice on the best way to handle the confusion there, or is there really nothing to be confused about? You're just not looking at it the right way. You're just thinking it all has to do with confusion because it clashes. Well, no, there's more. What is that?
Well, yeah. What first thing, I will say Chinese astrology, and I'm not familiar with it, but I have known a few Chinese astrologers. It's extraordinarily accurate and has nothing whatsoever to do with planets or any of the things that traditional astrology is concerned with. It is concerned with time cycles, is the way I would put it. So the first thing I would say, the year of the Earth Pig may not be particularly spiritual in general, but then you've got to look back at what you are. Are you a fire dragon? Are you a water monkey? You might not necessarily be as held back by the nature of the Earth Pig to not be spiritual. You may naturally be a person that thrives during the period of Earth Pig. Again, I don't know enough Chinese astrology, but I mean that was one of the ways I would look at that, which actually will tie back into something that you had mentioned before we got on the air about retrograde, but I'll get into that in a second. But it does tie into this. One size doesn't fit all. And even in astrology, I would say the same thing. It's definitely a period of expansion for you if Jupiter is, whatever house Jupiter's in, and the numerology reading saying it's a good time to expand. You may be expanding in a way that's very focused. Maybe the Earth Pig is actually going to keep you from going in 20 different directions and instead aim you in a very particular direction because it isn't perhaps as openly and relentlessly spiritual as other Chinese years. It may aim your spirituality and your expansion in a very particular direction. So that's one possible way of looking at it. And I can roll back, as I said earlier, I didn't mention anything at all about retrograde planets. And what it is, to those of people who don't know, is a retrograde planet is a planet that looks like it's backing up from the point of view of the Earth. Once we discovered that the sun was the center of the solar system, we understood why. But for older astrologers, all they knew was they'd see Mercury go forward, then turn around and go backwards, and then go forward again. And all the planets, except for the sun and the moon, do retrograde motion. Now, the outer planets from Jupiter on out do like 5 or 6 months every year, and I'm not as concerned about those. But and people sometimes look at retrograde planets as debilitated in some way. Excuse me. But I don't feel that at all. One example in my chart, my Jupiter is retrograde in Gemini. So my Jupiter is expansive, right? It's where I grow and get benefits from it. It's in Gemini, which is about communications, but it's retrograde, and it's in my second house of finances. Now, as an art director, what I've often been called in to do as a freelancer, about more than half the jobs I get, are people who have screwed up a job and they need somebody to come in and fix it. And I'm the guy there doing it. So is it retrograde? Well, yes, I'm kind of going backwards to go forward. And so is retrograde a problem for me? Not necessarily, because I've learned to use it in a way that makes me money, which is where Jupiter's in the second house of finances. So coming in to fix, as a matter of fact, the job I'm working on now for the past year, I actually have to follow another art director's template because they can't do the job right now. And so I've been called in to fill in until they're up to it, doing the job again. So once again, I'm going backwards to go forwards. I'm making money doing somebody else's design. Which is not always the thrill of every art director, but it pays the bills. And besides, you're still communicating and doing what you love. So some people are born with Mercury retrograde, and they thrive when Mercury goes retrograde in the sky. So you can't just automatically say Mercury retrograde is bad or good, or Earth Pig is bad or good. Mercury retrograde goes retrograde 3 to 4 times a year every year. And I often tell people, if you're 30 years old, you've gone through more than 90 Mercury retrograde periods at this point. And if you don't know how to handle them now, there's not a lot anybody can tell you what to do. But one piece of general advice I will offer when Mercury or Venus or Mars go retrograde, and you'd have to consult an ephemeris to know when this has happened, understand the key phrase here is the suffix re. Okay, and if you look at the nature of any individual planet, Mercury is about thinking and communication. It's time to reassess your thoughts, rewrite the story, rewrite your resume, replan your concepts and your ideas. When Venus goes retrograde, it's about relationships and one-to-one stuff. You may find an old lover entering your life again for some reason. You may find yourself reassessing your relationships and deciding what needs to be done and not done. Mars goes retrograde, you may get a couple of false starts, because you should be reassessing your actions and making your plans more concrete and more general. So I don't think retrograde is a terrible thing, but you need a plan B and you need a plan C, and you need to be a little flexible. So with Mercury retrograde 3 times a year, so you miss some appointments. Maybe the bus maybe they throw you off the bus and you have to take the subway instead, or whatever it might be. This is what retrograde is about. So I can't make a blanket statement of Earth Pig is this, or because it depends upon who the person is who's experiencing it too. You might look at 2 different people's charts. They both want to be basketball players. Well, one of them is 6'6", and the other one's 5'2". And so you may be inclined to say, I'm going to predict you're probably not going to be a famous basketball player, but maybe by sheer force of will, the 5'2" guy or gal becomes the world's most famous 5'2" basketball player. It's possible. It's a lot more work because it doesn't flow with the energy that's naturally there, which is what I think astrology readings are about. Find the energy in your chart and work with it. That's what genuine control is, being able to read energy and work with it and create it. And, one of my favorite little stories, it's a Zen story about good or bad. And, there's a farmer and one of his horses runs away. And his neighbor comes over and says, "Oh, that's bad." And the farmer goes, "Maybe." And then 2 days later, the horse comes back with a wild horse. That now the farmer's got two horses. And the neighbor says, "Well, that's wonderful." And the farmer says, "Maybe." And then the next day, the farmer's son, is trying to break the wild horse and make him useful. And the horse throws his son, and the son breaks his leg. And the guy comes over from next door, and what does he say? "Oh, that's bad." The farmer says, "Maybe." And then 2 days later, the king's men come through town. They're looking to conscript soldiers into the army, but they can't take his son because his son's got a broken leg. And the guy next door comes over and says, "That's good." What does the farmer say? "Maybe." So it's always, you can't say something is guaranteed good or bad, right off the bat. You have to see what's happening. What's in a person's chart. Maybe somebody's really, really good at turning problems around. So their chart is going to maybe really shine the most during periods of havoc and chaos because they know how to create things out of it and work with it. Other people may be very, very orderly and will suffer during that period. But maybe during the very orderly period, the chaos guy is just bouncing off the walls and getting arrested and causing trouble because it's too quiet for him and it doesn't function for him. So that's what I see when I see things that contradict. I try to get to the core of what's actually being addressed here and who's experiencing it, is a very key part of how I look at contradictions.
Thank you for the advice. And
okay.
I guess we'll close out now. We got about 7 minutes till the 2-hour point of the start of the show. So you mentioned the Seth Material a few times. Daniel Teague actually pointed that out in his message about you to me, and he says he uses Seth Material a lot. So you mentioned it in passing a few times, didn't really get into much detail. Well, why don't you close out by getting in detail for those that heard that and are scratching their heads wondering what that's all about. So let's finish that, and then I guess after that you can plug your shows and your sites one more time, and then we'll call it a night.
Okay, let's see. 7 minutes for Seth. Okay. Just the origin of the material, there was an author, freelance writer named Jane Roberts, and in the early 60s she got a book contract to write a book, and the premise was she was going to go out and experience every psychic thing or spiritual thing and write one chapter about it. So she'd maybe check out a Ouija board and then check out a numerologist and write a chapter about what her personal experiences were. Well, they started with the Ouija board, and it was moving and it was working, and then what happened is she kept hearing what was going to be spelled out in her head before it was spelled out, until finally, after about a few sessions, she suddenly stood up and started speaking and channeling an entity that referred to himself as Seth. Okay. And her husband took everything down. Her husband became her transcriber and wrote everything down that Seth said. And she resisted it a lot. She didn't like the idea of channeling somebody else. She thought, well, I must be doing something psychological. This must be some hidden personality, whatever it is. So in the late 60s, what happened is Seth decided that besides just holding these sessions, he wanted to write, and he just said, "You can call me Seth. I'm an energy entity that is no longer in a body." And he mentioned he'd been here a number of times in a body, but now he was no longer in a body. And he decided to write his own book. He said, rather than just doing these sessions, and literally he dictated an entire book, chapter headings, punctuation, everything. And the first book was called Seth Speaks, The Eternal Validity of the Soul. And he continued to write books after that. I think he's put about 8 or 10 books out. Jane Roberts herself passed away in 1984, but there was a lot of material that was covered in that brief time. You strip Seth down to the absolute core of what he talks about is we create reality. Every one of us, all the time. Every one of us matters. It doesn't matter if we never come out of our home All of us are creating reality together. We have influence over reality. We can make things happen that we haven't realized in the past, that we've taken as our own limitations. We are capable of much more than we currently realize. And one of the quickie examples he gave is he said for years, nobody could break the 5-minute mile. And it was believed by a lot of sports people that no one will ever run faster than 5-minute mile. We've reached that limitation. And then what happened somewhere along the way is somebody broke the 5-minute mile. And then 3 other people broke it in the next 2 years, broke his record. So there was a mental block in place that all of us as a society agreed upon. No one can break the 5-minute mile, except this one guy, this one clown said, I'm going to do it. And he believed it, and he did it. And then suddenly the rules are gone, and everybody's breaking the 5-minute mile. So we're quite capable of much more than we're aware of. And he basically says we're all connected, and in a nutshell, the best way to live our lives is with a sense of faith and a sense that the universe leans in our direction. And when he says faith, he's not talking about some sort of Pollyanna, like, everything's going to work out just fine and wonderful with butterflies and sunflowers. But what he says is the sense of faith that you tell yourself, there's a solution. I don't know it yet. I'll find it. Okay. That sense of belief that, like, there's a problem here and I hate it and I can figure it out. I'll figure a way out. Because we can limit ourselves with our beliefs. Our beliefs create our reality. And I find this, I've read all of his books dozens of times. I've lectured on the Seth Material. I find him a breath of fresh air because he gives us all of our power and responsibility back to us and says we're not victims. We're involved in this on every level. So that's kind of in a nutshell. I recently gave a whole hour-long interview on Seth, so but that's the nutshell what it's about. And he wrote books about our personal connection to the universe, and then towards the end he wrote a book. One of my favorites is The Individual and the Nature of Mass Events, and how together all of us create mass events, and then we choose to participate or not. Like we create a hurricane, and some of us become victims, some of us choose to be, rescuers, some of us choose to not get involved. So there's a limit to how much I can get in a few minutes, but that's kind of where a lot of it's coming from. And I found his books very refreshing and freeing for me in many, many ways. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. My allergies are getting to me too.
Yeah, I should have put myself on mute there. Didn't realize that I didn't.
That's okay. Happens.
Okay. Anyhow.
So who I am, okay, if you go to Facebook, I'm Anthony Picco, and you can find me there. I also have a webpage on Facebook called Cosmic Tuesdays, where I announce all of my radio show guests in advance, and you can check out who's coming. Actually, I'm going to have a great astrologer on next week, Adam Ellenboss. So you can check it out there. There's also the way to get to the archives there. I have a blog that I'm going to finally get back to working. You can if you just put in cosmictuesdays.com, it'll take you to it. It's on WordPress. And my radio show is on Spreaker.com, Spreaker, Spreaker.com/show/cosmic-Tuesdays every Monday evening from 9:30 to 11. Although Adam Ellenboss has to go to bed early, so next week it'll be 7:30 to 9 o'clock. But other than that, it's always 9:30 to 11 Eastern time, and we have lots of interesting people covering all kinds of wonderful. Daniel Teague was on the show for a while too. Has been on a couple of times, so he's one of those listening. He's one of the mutual friends that Andrew and I have that brought us together. So that's the story of where you can find me, and hook up with me if you want an astrology reading or whatever it is you want to ask me. I'm welcome to entertain anybody with anything they want to ask about.
I do hope this increases the size of your pocketbook if people watch this program and get inspired to have you. So I prefer not to pay for astrology readings. I just check the daily horoscope, and I'll make sure I upload this within the next day or two. So it's been a while. I just got back from India from the International Yoga Festival, so I've been on a bit of a radio hiatus for a while, and had to adjust to the jet lag from that long trip halfway around the world. So
yeah, that's a long one.
yes. So I'll get this up. I'll send you the link when I do, and good luck on everything you do. Enjoy the spring season that we just had started. Enjoy the full moon energies tonight. Take care
Yep.
now.
I'm going to have some fun. You too. Take care.